Okay, good morning. We are in Hilchos Treifos, Lamed Gimel. Okay, we are doing Seif Tet. Nimtza kotes beveshet leorko ularachva. All right. Now there are some pictures, you can look it up, from the Simla Chadash, from Sichas Chulin, from Rabban David. Okay, so if you find some kind of a thorn, and it could be lying in either direction, it's just loose, inside the veshet, ve'eno tachuv bo, kshera. But it's not puncturing, it's not going through the membrane, so then it's kshera. Imin alav koredam mibachutz, assuming you don't see, bleeding, a drop of blood from the other side, because then we're afraid it made a hole. And we know a nekev in a veshet is posel be mashu. Imhu tachuv bo asura. But as soon as it's wedged in is not the right word, but as soon as it's poking inside, even if it's you don't see it going all the way through, but you see it poking inside, then it's asura. Afilu ein sham kored dam, even if there's no blood. Because we're afraid that maybe, even if you don't see the hole, there was a hole, but then it got better. Like that coat was in there for a little while, I don't know how long, and then it sealed itself, right? We know our bodies, they heal. Right? Vehivri, venitrape, and then it became ve'eno nikar, and now you can't, became healed, and now you can't see the hole anymore. V'yesh machshirin, im ein kored dam mibachutz, delo chayshinan shama hivri. And he says, but then, some are mekel or machsha, they say it's okay, as long as you don't see blood from the other side, because we're not choshesh that maybe it got better. And so the Ramah writes, we're mekel in our town, Be'otan avazot shemal itim, lasot mehen shuman, sheishtakana ba'ir, livdok achar nekevas haveshet. He says, now we have these geese that we stuff them with food, and we want to make them get nice and fat. So therefore, we made a takana to check. Achar nekevas haveshet mishum deshchiach yoter misirchos hareya. And it's more common to have these holes in the veshet than a sircha and a reya, which we have to do bedika for the lung. V'nagula hakel, and the minhag became to be mekel. Biyashav lo kots beveshet, if there's a kots in the veshet, im edo nakuv mishnei tzdadim, if we don't see a hole that goes all the way through, or she'en kored dami bachutz, and if you don't see blood on the outside, v'yesh v'daktek bazeh harbek yu iser deraita, and one must be very careful, as we're talking about an iser deraita. V'teraya tov shelo livdok klal, v'lismach aruba milivdok ulahaka b'makom v'ika reyusa. And it'd be better not to check, and to be somech on the rov, and to be mekel. But now when you check, you have to check, and it's a machloket l'maisa what to do. So ask your shochet about checking the veshet. Yud.
One checks the veshet and then it finds the coats inside. That's what this is all talking about. So it's not stuck to the wall.
It's not piercing into the wall. I mean, if the side of it is stuck, it's not an issue. It's the sharp part that's piercing through. Once it's piercing through, that's when it becomes an issue. Okay. All right. Yud. Nifrat haveshet miakana v'nidaldilu ze mize berov shiur orkan treifa. So normally the veshet and the kana are attached through a membrane along the way. If they pull apart from each other most of their length, so then it becomes a treifa. Yud Aleph. Zefek shenikav gago nekev mefulash b'mashu treifa. So the zefek, that's the crop. So this is in a chicken. So it first goes down the esophagus, the veshet, and then it goes through, or enters or through. The zefek is basically it's like a pouch that's along along the esophagus. So the food's going to go in there and then continue out into eventually to the korban and v'chule. So the top of the zefek is what's attached to the esophagus, right? And basically, you're going to have a tube, right? Remember, right? The vesh is the tube that goes from one end on the. You're going to end up having two tubes along the top of the esophagus, along the zevek, the crop. So if you have a nekev mafulash, so then let's see, right? It goes all the way through. You have a hole that goes through and through. So then, if it's on the gag, on the top of the zefek, that's when it becomes a treifa. Ve'ezehu gago. What do you call the gag? That's a problem. It's if when the neck is extended, so then it moves. When the esophagus moves, then the top of the zefek also moves with it. So how do you look at that? You pull. When you take it out, you take the chicken and you pull on the tubes on both sides of the zefek, and you see whatever moves when you pull on it, that's where it's a nekev mefulash b'masha who makes it a treifa. Otherwise, if it's below that area, if that area doesn't move when you pull on the tubes, so then it wouldn't be a problem. Aval shara zefek shenikav mutter.
Is that something that requires a veto, or is only if you notice
I think the only thing we check for is just the two siman, to the best of my knowledge. Soma Tegidim, we also check, we saw that. And I don't think there's anything else we check. Maybe something with the Deah in Eretz Yisrael, but we'll get there when we get there. Haga. Nital has zefek treifa. Now, if the entire zefek is missing, then it's a treifa. Okay. Now, you can have where the zevek is missing. This is in a picture, but most of the esophagus is still intact. So you can still have food going through the esophagus all the way through to the korkavan, even though it's missing. But then, regardless, it doesn't matter since the whole zefek is missing. It's a treifa. Nikev abasar amei shebein zefek a korkavan treifa. And if you have a hole from base, I don't know if it's technically called the esophagus or not, but the tube that's connected where it continues from the zefek to the korkavan, then that would make it a treifa if you have a hole. Okay, let's go on to Siman Lamed Dalet. Din makas agregeres unakeva. So now we're going to be going back to the windpipe, to the trachea, the kana. The gregeret is, right, that's referring to the kana. So here we go. Siman Lamed Dalet, Seif Aleph. Gregeret shenifsak. Rov chalala. So if the kana is, you have a cut, right? It's a cut, in a clean cut, nothing is missing, but it's sliced, it's a clean cut, and it goes as deep as most of the halal, asura. So then it's a treifa. If the cut is through the majority, right, you go 51% sliced through the kana, then that's when it's a treifa. If it's less than 50%, it's still kshera. And this, what was that? Grogeret? Yeah, but it's referring to the kana and to the trachea. And you go by halacha l'maisa. We go by Rov Asad and Chochmas Adam, Ben David, others. It's machlokas. If you go by the majority, looking at the walls of the trachea, because there is some thickness, especially on depending which the bottom or which half. But anyways, there is some thickness to the kana itself, but that we don't consider. We go by rov halal of the majority of the airspace inside. Anyways, and where does it make it a treifa? If it has to be in a place that's ra'oi l'shchita, or even closer to the head. Right? Because you're allowed to, right, once you get outside of the tabasa gadola, or exactly where over there. Um, okay, right, beyond the vocal cords. So that's when it becomes, even if beyond there, it's outside of the makom mashchita, that also makes it a treifa if it's nivsak rov chalala. Okay, let's go to bet. Im nikva nekev sheish bo chisaron ki'isar. So before we had just a clean slice, nothing was missing. Now we have a hole where a piece of the trachea is gone. So if it's the size of an isar, it's asura. What's an isar? So nobody really knows. Isar italki. Times in the Gemara, everybody knew. Nowadays, we don't know. But we mention this by the halachas of an esrog. And so I saw it in Dirshu that he thinks nowadays, researchers thinks, it's about 23, 24 millimeters. Okay. But in halacha, it's not clear what it is. Right? And of course, I don't know how reliable, but that, anyways. V'im nitla mimena ritzua leorka, or, now this is, you see the rings of the kane, they don't, it's not a full circle, it almost reaches a full circle, but part of it is just a membrane all the way across. Right? So you can see that in one of the pictures, or look it up. The same shear to the, well, basically yes, but it depends. Let's finish the Ram when we get to the Ramah. I think it's in this Ramah. Let's finish. But yes. If it's missing from the ritzua, so then if you can make a circle around it and it's the size of an isar, in other words, it's the length of an isar, if it's that long, a strip, so then it makes it asar. Treifa. Some say we don't know what the shear of an isar is. Hilkach misharimoto berov rochav chalal hakane. So this is an interesting machlokas. The Shulchan Aruch paskins, and this is actually the psak of the Shach and Taz. They side with the Shulchan Aruch that what's the size of an isar lahalacha? You go by rov chalal of the trachea of an animal. That's the definition of what an isar is. The inner diameter. The inner, I mean,
No, the inner area.
well, if it's chisaron, there's issues of, it goes by area, but it's the inner diameter that defines what would be. You go by the majority, 51% of a rochav kana diameter, most of the diameter of a kana of a behema, that's your isar. Isar may have been bigger, but that's what we're going to go with. And that's the halacha l'maisa according to Rav Ben David. And your question about also the oaf, this part doesn't exactly apply to an oaf because you'd long go through the entire trachea based on the size. So it kind of depends. Yeah? It depends on which aspect. But okay, so that's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to quickly read it. The Ramah holds that bain for ophos, bain for behemas. He says, we don't know what an isar is, so we go by rov chalal of a chicken, which is just millimeters. And that's the psak that applies even for a behema. And that's the Silma Chadasha goes with it, and the Kresia Plesi follows the Ramah. But Rabban David said we're a Mekel, and he says when you look at an actual trachea of an oaf, or really trachea of a behema, he says it makes sense, the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, that would make sense that that's what the size of a coin would be, and it makes sense with the modern day researchers what we believe the actual coin was. But obviously we know it can't be, it doesn't make sense to say it's rov chalal of an oaf. The Ramah knows that, but since he doesn't know what an isar is, he chose that shear, which is a little bit extreme, but he chose that shear to be on the safe side.
That was
ולפי מה שהדבר בסמך דשיעור איסר הוא פחות מרוב. So the Ramah has a problem with the Shulchan Aruch, and really the Shulchan Aruch doesn't make it up. He gets it from the Rashba, but it's a whole thing. The Shach and Taz. We're not going to get into the entire details. It's a little bit confusing, but also depends on which way you orient your coin. Rochav and Orach. And one is area, one is just a clean slice. So that goes part of to the whole mix. But I'll say Ayin Sham. That's what the Chochmas Adam says. He says, I'm not going to be a marich because it doesn't usually happen, and weiter. But anyways, he writes, Im Kain. But anyways, Rabban David says sometimes it does actually happen. You open it up and you see a hole. And he says the minhag is to be mekel like the Shulchan Aruch Shachtaz. Anyway, Im Kain mi she'eno baki yavo lahakel. And so someone who doesn't know is going to come to be mekel. Akenir diratza lomar rochav rov chalal kana shel of. So therefore, I'm just strict like rov chalal kana shel of, which is just millimeters. Dehu pachot Isar, and certainly that's less than an Isar. Umishe'eno baki yatrif bechol inyan, and someone who doesn't know what he's doing, just be matrif with any hole, or whatever you're confident with. Okay, Gimel. Nikva saviv hekefa nekavim dakim. Now, let's say you have tiny little holes that are in a row, right, along the path. Tiny little holes. Ze eitzel ze. Kenekev hanafa. Kind of like, okay, if you could imagine having a sieve that has a bunch of holes, but it's not exactly like an afa. When we have an afa, you're going to have a sieve, you're going to have a whole bunch of holes in all kinds of orders. Random. But anyways, here we have, it's in a line, and you have holes, and then also it depends on the case, if it's missing or not missing. Obviously in our sieves, there's a hole that's missing. But anyways, let's keep reading. Im ein bahem chisaron. If there's nothing missing, it's just a puncture hole, but nothing's missing from the kana. So then mistarfin larov chalala. You do add them up, you push them all together, and you add them up. V'yimesh b'hem chisaron. So then, and if you basically, if it's going to go around it depends on the situation, but let's say it basically goes around the entire kana, then you can be mitzdarif them all together, and you can end up with rov, or whatever. Well, you just add them up, and if it ends up to rov, it depends. You could be a combination of a slit and then some tiny little holes. If there is actually missing, so then mitzdarfin lekiisar. So then it could even be mitzdarif leisar, and then you basically have to make a little cheshbon if you're looking at area, if you're looking by straight length. But if there's actual holes, right, it's kind of l'chumra. You're mitzdarifin leisar of area or just circumference. She'im yesh kis isar b'nekavim imashalim shebenehem asura. So then, if you have holes, what's worse about having holes is you can actually be mitzdarif all the gaps in between. So your potential chumrah, by if it's missing, then you could add up the gaps, the space that's not ripped in between every hole, and that's been starif. But that's only if those gaps are smaller than the actual holes. This is the chumrah. But if the gaps are bigger than the holes, then they're not mitzdarif. Ein shebeneim mitzdarif, whatever is between them is not mitzdarif, and it basically has the same din as a nekev that there's nothing missing. Okay. Dalet. Ba'of. Im nekev kenafa chotech hamakom emenukav kenafa umesimu al pi chalal hakane im yesh bo kedei lachavot rov hakane asura. Okay, how do we read this? So you have the chicken, and now it has the holes, right? The holes that we just spoke about. So you cut chotech hamakom emenukav kenafa al pi. I'm not sure how to read this exactly. And you put it on the Not exactly sure how to read it, but basically you have to make a cheshbon that whatever, if it's the majority of the chalal, of the kana, so then that's what makes it a treifa. Yeah, sorry. Haga, v'im nechsera rageret sha'of, yesh rim nesharin kamo v'nikva kenafe. And if there's a little bit missing by the chicken, so some say you do the same, you just treat it like it's a whole, and that's how you mishar it. V'yesh omrim the misharin agadol lefi gadlo v'katan lefi katna lefi erech hashir shu v'beima ki isar. And so this also goes back to your question before. So then some say that you either go by an you don't, the same isar that applies to a behema, you make it a proportionally smaller on an oaf. So that's the Yeshomrim. Okay, so that's a machlokas. Hey, Yeshomrim she'im nivcheta kamodalet shelo nitala pechat alatali ve'omet v'zakuk sham kedalet. So what's this? Basically, you have a window, a flap, exactly. So it's cut on 3 sides, and on the 4th side, right? So if it would be a rectangle or a square, it's cut on 3 of the sides, and one of them it's completely attached. So then it's a flap. Kivan shehadelet sotem hanekev tzarich sheya pechat gadol kadei shechanes bo isar dahayne yoter miki isar. Basically, it just means you look at the flap as it moves, and if it's bigger than an isar, so then it's a treifa. If it's less, it's not. You have to be able to fit an isar inside. In other words, you get a little bit of a kula. You don't do a perfect measurement of area because you actually you get to all the extra corners on all the 4 corners, because the round isar has to fit completely inside. And the reason why we're more mako is because at the end of the day, the piece of membrane or trachea is still there. So therefore, it's not as bad as having a complete hole. Okay, go ahead.
Is it on a diagonal or on a horizontal?
Well, no, he said the whole thing inside. So the stomach's got to be a square unless
I don't think it matters.
the narrower side of the
Right, and then you
rectangle.
put it in.
The isar has to fit inside.
Uh,
Good?
Yeah.
One more, stop. Stop? Okay. Stop.